Recording in progress.
All right, Kimmy, are you ready? I'm gonna have Donna come up to do the intro for us, and then we go from there, okay?
That's great.
Welcome to today's eLotus webinar, proudly sponsored by Evergreen Herbs. With over 2 decades of experience in providing quality CEU content, we are dedicated to helping you expand your knowledge and skills. Offering an invaluable lineup of 250 speakers, 900 courses, and a staggering 3,500 hours of continuing education, our goal is to deliver the best educational experience possible. I'm Donna Chow, your host and your moderator, and I am delighted to guide you through today's webinar. Today's class is Ethical Inclusion of Cultural Competency and Health Disparities, presented by Kimberly McMinn. The class will run from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Pacific time, and we will have 4 scheduled breaks with lunch from 12 to 1 p.m. Before we begin, let's go ahead and take a moment to familiarize ourselves with some important features of Zoom. First, we have the chat room. It's an excellent tool to connect with your colleagues and our speaker. I encourage you to set your chat preference to everyone so that everyone can see what you're writing and be part of the conversation. Secondly, the Q&A is where you can ask relevant questions for our speaker, Kimmy. Keeping the session organized and efficient, please limit your inquiries to the topic at hand. And lastly, for those eligible, the CEU quiz will be available on the following working day. And I'll notify you guys via email when it's ready. Okay, today's speaker is Kimberly McMinn. Kimmy has been practicing TCM since 2011, holding an NCCAOM board certification and license to practice TCM in Texas. Before pursuing Chinese medicine, Kimmy worked as a public health expert and humanitarian and worked for various international and local agencies. She holds a Master of Public Health in Infectious Disease from Tulane University and a BS in Biomedical Science from Texas A&M University. With a background in providing public health trainings in multiple countries, Kimmy's dedication to outstanding medical care is evident. Her passion for Chinese medicine and promoting healthy living is exemplified in her work in the Austin area. Kimmy has previously taught courses on various topics with us, and you can find links to her classes on her speaker page. But for now, let's delve into today's session and embrace the opportunity to learn something new. We are excited to see what Kimmy has to offer for us and what's in store. So Kimmy, would you go ahead and share your screen and PowerPoint? Let's get started.
Sure. All right, can everyone see that?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. I just want to welcome everyone on a Saturday. I know that these webinars can sometimes be long, so I really encourage you just to take a break and please ask questions, make it more interactive. My name is Kimmy, as Donna said, and she gave such a beautiful introduction to me. I just kind of want to go over a little bit regarding housekeeping. Obviously, we've all been trained in different styles, so I really want you guys to share your experiences as well. The presentation is coming from a public health perspective, but I'm tying in, obviously, how it applies to us as acupuncturists and TCM practitioners. And then please take breaks and use the restroom as needed. We're going to have a couple different breaks here coming up about 9:15, and then again at 10:45. You guys will have an hour for lunch, which will be great. And then we'll have a couple breaks in the afternoon too. So this disclaimer is that this presentation is for educational purposes only. I am not a lawyer. I do not have any legal background. So I just want to be clear on that, that if there are things that you need legal advice on or counsel, definitely consult a lawyer on that. I'm really taking a perspective on this course about how we can look at increasing our ability to work with all sorts of different people. So today I'm actually was supposed to have 2 guest speakers, but one of them unfortunately is sick. But the other one is one of the acupuncture students from the school that I teach at. I teach over at IOMA here in Austin, and this student is, they are a trans student, and they're going to be giving you guys a presentation on that as well. And Jonah's really great. So I think probably after our first break is when they'll be able to arrive and give you guys a chance to listen to somebody other than me as well. So a little bit about me. I have a master's in public health, as Donna explained. I currently work in public health and emergency management. I'm still teaching at the acupuncture school. I still see some patients, but when the pandemic came about, I just felt really drawn to go back and assist in a way that I had been trained previously. I've worked in all types of acupuncture clinics, community clinics, free clinics working with HIV and Hep C patients. I've worked in, kind of the fancier spa-like clinic, very medically focused, worked in a fertility clinic in San Antonio over the years. So I have a vast amount of experience, but I really like to learn about different styles and hear about people's different access. Normally, I teach classes that are a little bit more focused on infectious disease or clinical. So this is a little bit different to work with the ethics part. I'm going to bring in some stories about working overseas and working in disaster situations. I had gone to Nepal after the earthquakes in 2015, and I volunteered at a medical clinic there doing acupuncture and herbs. So I have a couple different viewpoints that I'm going to bring to this presentation, but I encourage you guys to let me know if there's anything specific or if you want me to talk, expand further. As I stated, I do supervise at the local TCM school, and I really love it. It's fun. This is a course description. You guys can all read this on your own. I do want to say I'm not an expert or claiming to know all of this. I've worked and journeyed all around the world, working with different populations and peoples. But of course, that's just my perspective. I'm still learning every day. I make plenty of mistakes and try to learn from them as we go through. I know we all do. Listening is really important when you're working with cultural competency, and it goes a long way to the patient and to the provider. Learning this type of information is a lifelong quest. I personally feel like we never stop learning about how to work and make people feel comfortable. As acupuncturists, we really treat people with respect and love. That's what we do. And so we're all seeking to learn from each other. So I really just want to state there's no judgment in this presentation, and that I hope that everyone is able to share their viewpoints and their questions in a really open and positive way. So the overall aim is how culture connects to health, how cultural identity affects the interactions with our clients and our patients, and how to better engage, assess, and treat clients from diverse backgrounds. This obviously can mean something different to everyone. How our culture connects to our health is so intricately intertwined with our being and who we are. I really feel like that we could spend days talking about this subject. I really tried to make it informative, but sometimes the topics with ethics are a little bit dry. So that's why we'll try to bring in some stories and things of that nature. I also have a video that we'll be playing later on today. It's coming from the American Medical Association, and it's a panel discussion about equity in healthcare. There's a series of them, but the video that I chose is longer. It's over 20 minutes. And we can adjust if we decide that, hey, maybe we don't want to watch it. But I think it brings such a rich variety of information that I think people will find it interesting. Let me check. I see that there's some questions in the chat. Okay, just good morning. So Donna, if you can help me just monitor the chat as well. I think there might be a question in the Q&A too. So going back to our aim, cultural identity really affects our interactions with clients. Obviously, there's a million things that affect our interaction, how we feel, how the client feels, what's happening in our personal lives, what's happening in their personal lives, what's happening in the world. So cultural identity is just one factor in those interactions, but I do think it's a huge factor, and it can really help us connect to the patient to better engage and assess and treat with those patients, treat with how they're coming to us and what kind of background they have and what their viewpoint and what they're comfortable with. So the course goals, these are what eLotus submits for the CEU certification. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about those, but just really learning cross-cultural competency. We're going to go through some definitions and some ideas. I'm going to present a couple different tools that are like self-assessment tools for our listening skills that you can go to in line. I'll drop those links in the chat as we go throughout the day. And we'll also do a couple different viewpoints and things of that nature to understand policies that decrease barriers to patients. Again, that's a vast area of topics. So we're really going to just skim the top of that, but I think it will give people an idea if there's something that you find you need to work on yourself or something that you're really interested in and that you want to delve deeper into. I used to work with an organization called the National Center for Farm Worker Health. And that organization is located in Texas, but it works all over the United States. And they work with healthcare centers that provide information and provide medical services to migrant workers in mostly agriculture and those types of positions. So I worked with the migrant health centers on accessing different trainings and topics for cultural competency and a lot about how to use their language interpretation lines and why that was very, very important. So there may be a little bit of that in this presentation, obviously from a public health standpoint as well. Recognize diversification among population at risk for chronic conditions. That's one topic that we can all talk about on a regular basis, but maybe just skim in this presentation. So before we get started, I want you guys to just personally identify 2 culturally specific health maintenance practices from your culture. What are the effects of illness on your family as a system? And how does culture influence the way people use healthcare service? Obviously, that's a huge topic, but what I want you guys to think about, and maybe just drop in the chat, take 10 or 15 minutes just to kind of answer, maybe not that long, just to kind of answer these questions and drop some comments in the chat if you're comfortable doing that. If you're not, that's fine as well. But we want to talk about what are the effects of illness on your family. And I'm going to just pull up my chat screen so I can see what people are sharing. Does anybody have anything to share? I get it if it's too early in the morning. I know it's all different times for people joining in from all different sections. while you guys are kind of thinking, and again, it's totally okay if you don't want to share. I'll share a little bit about effects on my family. Oh, here's a great one. Non-casino, it's early for me too. Health doesn't really have health services for chronic illnesses. Effects of illness seem cumbersome, but the community comes together to help. And then the other topic is mostly financial. So both of those are really incredibly important. The way that our family rallies to help each other is extremely important to healing, probably one of the most important things if we have family and community to work on that. With the financial situation, as we can see, I know there's people joining from many different countries on this presentation, but here in the US, we are seeing just an onslaught of people over the years having to do the GoFundMe to get money to save themselves or save their family member from a devastating experience with the medical system. And that is just a tragedy. I think one of the biggest parts of the financial barriers to health maintenance is the fact, besides our insurance system and our medical system, is really the fact that the schools that we have to go to as medical providers are also extremely expensive. And that is something that we consider when we're setting our prices, also something that we consider when we're going to work in different fields. When I worked in public health, I often was working overseas for very minimal money or for no money at all. So I do believe that is part of that financial barrier. It's extremely sad. Here's one that says the family pulls together or the family pulls apart. I second that. That is really shown in lots of tragedies, whether it's a medical illness or a death in the family or a disaster, if people have a disaster at their house. Here's one that is the culture typically uses Western medicine with insurance as a first line, mixed in with chiro, acupuncture, massage, mostly because of my influence, which is fantastic. That's one of the best things that we can do. Some of the friends are alternative, but the culture is mostly wasp white and boring and think that the MD is God and the insurance is great. We know we went into this medicine because we wanted to make a difference, that was not always the only path. So thank you for sharing that, Tina. Food, I do agree, food as medicine is really important. Being from a country that has free public health, the US system seems strange and unfair. Thank you for that comment. I have also worked overseas, and I have this really interesting perspective. We do keep a lot of medical care that other countries aren't able to access. Sometimes that's wonderful. It increases the price. We have all these issues with the pharmaceutical companies, with the insurance companies. So I do agree, it is very strange and really unfair. Oh, someone was explaining what WASP means. Thank you for that. And in this one, in my culture, psychological illness usually will not be talked about. That is so important. I think that is a really an area that's missing in a lot of cultures, that it's not accessible to be more open, or there's a stigma about that as well. I really appreciate you guys sharing these comments and working with that. I think it just gives us a perspective of where people are coming from and what they're talking about as well. And just think about for your own self, what other questions arise from this? What other questions can you think about? What do you identify to yourself as important in your treatment? And then how does your culture identify that? When I was in acupuncture school, my mother was starting to get very ill and coming towards the end of her life. And she was extremely anxious about passing, just very anxious about it. And she was worried about so many different things. What if my dad died before her? Who would take care of her? What What if she was going to feel pain as she was passing? Many different things. And I think my family's culture influenced that, because I grew up in a society from a religious perspective that had a lot of fear around death and things of that nature. And so I thought, well, let me see if I can help my mom with doing the NADA ear protocol. I had been trained on that when I worked in New Orleans before I went to acupuncture school. I had done NADA working with homeless healthcare. And I thought, well, let me just try this and see if my mom was open to it. She was very open to it. And I gave her another treatment, and I came back in, her room to check on her. And she said, "Oh, Kimberly, what is in these needles?" And I was like, "Oh no, Mom, there's nothing in them. They're solid. And this is a protocol that helps relax your fight or flight response and relax the sympathetic system." And she said, "Well, I feel like I just took a Xanax." And she was like, "I feel wonderful." And it really helped her relax. And it was something I continued even up until the day that she passed. I was able to provide that medicine to her. And I personally feel like it helped her. But the reason I kind of brought that up is the way that influenced my father, who thought that I should have gone. I studied for the MCAT and did all the things. I was going to go to allopathic, Western medicine school. And my dad thought, wow, why would you, go to this Chinese medicine school? What do you expect to get from it? And he saw the way that it was helping my mother, and it influenced him to come and ask me, do you think it could help with X, Y, and Z of his situation? So that was a fun thing for me to be able to experience the family in that way and teach them a little bit about how great our medicine is. I'm just checking the chat here. Okay. So let's go ahead and move on. If my slide projector will move, there we go. So here are some behaviors that we think about when people are ill. So modeling is one. Children learn by observing adults, how they respond to illness. I think that that's can be very important in our upbringing and thinking about how we upbring the next generation as well. But I don't think modeling is just experienced by children either. I think that many adults respond to that modeling. They see how people are reacting to illness, and then they portray those same types of behaviors. It could be anger, it could be fear, it could be that they are content with their situation. So those are behaviors that can really easily be contagious, for lack of a better word. And then stoicism should not be confused with the strength of character. I wanted to talk a little bit about that because I feel that we really are confused on that situation, that we're strong. We're strong if we can help with illness and not complain. We're strong if we deal with chronic pain on a daily basis. And people will constantly tell us that, oh, you're so strong and you're so able to handle your illness and things of that nature. And I personally, again, this is, coming from my personal background and viewpoint, is that that's not a strength of character, that people are unable to have a way to vent or be vulnerable about what they're dealing with their health. So I think that we should not continue to use that type of language if at all possible. What cultural expectations surrounding health behaviors have you experienced? I saw that Paul in the chat said listening is so important. Touch, prayer in an acceptable way, and honoring what the family member wants or is comfortable with, 100%. Thank you for sharing that. It really is, what does our client or our family member or our patient, whatever word that we're using for them, what are they comfortable with? What are they looking for when they come to see us? We all have our own personalities. We all have our own way of relating to people. We all have our own beliefs when we come to see a patient. And can we leave those at the door and think about their cultural expectations? Does anyone else have anything else that they want to type in the chat about those expectations surrounding health behaviors? Maybe something you've seen with yourself or something you've seen with your patients. I know this is really hard on Zoom. It's hard to interact. So I'm just trying to, keep everybody involved in the conversation. So the topic of what is culture, we all have our own definition, and I wish that we were in a room together where we could really expand on this and just go around the room to think about what people believe is their definition of culture. What do they feel? What do they experience? Culture is defined by a community or a society. There's no right or wrong answer at all to that question. Someone's typing in the chat, non-judgmental, safe space is a baseline for everyone. Absolutely. That's so important. Thank you. And culture really structures the way that people view the world. I know that I would not be the person that I am today if I have not had the experiences overseas and working with different populations and different cultures and trying my best to be able to understand, or not co-opt their understanding, obviously, but trying to be compassionate, trying to be empathetic, trying to be understanding of what people are experiencing. Someone posted in the chat, I'm not religious, but I have made myself comfortable with treating anyone from Christians to atheists because it's about healing and not my beliefs. Thank you for sharing that. That is extremely important as a behavior. Our own personal beliefs, we're very, it's natural for us to have them, but we don't want to put them onto our patients and clients. We have all been in that situation where we've had a doctor or a teacher or someone in an authority position that did push those types of situations and beliefs on us. And we're seeing it in the world right now, everywhere, sadly, that there are a lot of people that feel that their values and their beliefs are the only way to think, and that their practices and norms are the only way to be. And we all know, if you're in this class, that is definitely not something that we want to perpetuate. So culture involves a particular set of beliefs, norms, values, practices, whatever things that you want to use words to describe the nature of relationships, the way that people live their lives, the way that people organize their environments, the way that people interact in their own social group and with other social groups. It's a very complex and rich concept. Understanding it really requires a willingness to examine and grasp many elements and to comprehend how they come together. Again, stating it's very complex, it's very rich. I think often people, in my experience, I'll state that, people really often appreciate if someone is trying to understand their culture or trying to work with them and help them in a way that respects what they're feeling. I'm going to check a few things in the chat here. So someone put, sometimes patients are purposely withholding information to test the provider, able to make a proper diagnosis. Therefore, decisions as a good doctor or not. Yes, I think that we have seen that. It is unfortunate sometimes that we have to deal with that because we don't we don't want to be put through a test according to people, but I think, thank you for sharing that. I think that's very valid. Another comment is my friends usually share what illness they have and then asked us for prayers for their treatment process. That's very common. We see that a lot on social media. Tomorrow I'll be following up with a second class that is a little bit more, even more dry. It's about HIPAA and privacy and things like that. And one of those topics is that sometimes providers get frustrated about HIPAA because patients are sharing information on social media. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that social media aspect. But with this comment that we are asking for people to, whatever their belief system is, put that good energy out there, put that energetic energy out there, put that healing energy out there. I think that's great. And if we do that with our truth and believing that we want the best for the population and community, I think is wonderful. Another comment, I find that my experience with very different people has enriched me socially, mentally, and spiritually. Yes, so much. Yes. I think every chance that we get to get out of our box, to get out of our situation, to get out of our way of thinking is super important. And that really does enrich us socially and mentally and spiritually. It enriches us on so many levels. So thank you for sharing that. The culture is identified by, there's several elements that are identified and agreed to as constituting a culture. And so some of those are a common heritage and history that's passed from one generation to the next. Shared values, belief systems, customs, behavior, traditions, art and folklore, lifestyle, all of those are identified as elements that are agreed to as culture and contributing to that rich cultural component that we experience as life, honestly. Similar relationship and socialization patterns. And that one I think is a very interesting concept because yes, that's how we identify within our own culture. Sometimes I think that can be a barrier for us to be accepting or identify with another culture. And I know that in the day of age of social media and often political landscapes in different countries right now, that can be seen as, oh, well, our way is the only way. And I think if people are reading and they're listening and they're opening up their minds and opening up their hearts to other ways of doing things, it really just makes everyone better for a lack of word. A common pattern or style of communication or language, that's important with culture. Obviously, we can look at something such as the hearing community or the deaf community. They do identify largely as a culture. And so they like, in my experience and people that I've worked with and friends I've had, they like to use the word deaf with a capital D to kind of institute that they're talking about their culture, and then use possibly the word deaf with the lowercase d to show the medical diagnosis of hearing loss. So I think that those are concepts that we can think about. Geographic location and residence, the country, the community, whether we're urban, suburban, rural locations. I often see that right now in the way society is coming along as becoming very polarizing. And I think here in our acupuncture and our healing modalities, we're bringing it together to try to be unifying. And I'm very proud to be a part of a group of people that are working on that, but I still think we have a lot of blind spots within our acupuncture culture as well. And I know there's so many people working on that. And I really do, I really am glad to be teaching this class, but I really wanted for more people to be involved with it from different backgrounds and ethnicities and racial demographics. One of the speakers, the one that got sick, is a woman from the Caribbean, and she's just wonderful and vibrant, and she works in health equity. And so I'm going to try to do some justice to things that she would have talked about, but I'm really sad Race is not with us today. But I'm glad that you'll have an opportunity to listen to Jonah and listen to the video, so that you're not just hearing my voice as well. And again, please use the chat. I wish there was a way that you guys could talk, but I know with so many people online, it's more difficult. The word culture, one last thing before we move on to a next slide, is that the word culture can be applied to describe ways of lives of groups based on age and profession and what their socioeconomic status is, sadly, disability or sexual gender related orientations as well, geographic locations, membership in support groups. So, we can say, we talked a little bit about the deaf population, and we also can talk a little bit about groups that identify from their disease process or their illness as well. And so I think the focus on culture groups that are shaped by a really dynamic interplay among factors that really make up that person's identity. And we need to be conscious of that as we work with them. And we want to do our best to make them feel comfortable. I think you're all in agreement on that. So with this is a blend of multiple definitions. There's so many that we could choose from. There's so many more that we can add. So as I go through this list of like kind of common characteristics of culture, you guys can use the chat to put some other information in as well. That would be great. So culture is socially acquired. We aren't born into the world knowing all of the things about our culture. We're learning them from our family, from our friends, from community, sadly from media in some ways that's good, but it's socially acquired. As we grow and as we age, we're learning more and more. Culture is shared by a group. That is part of the base definition of it. I do believe that there's situations where it may not be shared by a group, and it may be an individualistic situation because of where someone has been placed in life. But most of the time, there's other elements that are shared by that group. It lends identity to individuals or groups. This can obviously be a good or a bad thing. Sometimes we define ourselves, and I'll speak for myself. I can define myself as an identity that might not be the best for my own mental health as well. But usually it's lending identity to those individuals or groups and just giving them an opportunity to experience things together, even if they're very far apart. That is one thing about social media that I think has been helpful. There are so many different groups available for people that may be struggling with a similar illness or a similar mental health issue, or dealing with family members that may be experiencing caregiver groups, things of that can be very, very helpful to someone to feel like I'm not the only person that's experiencing this. I'm not the only one who's had this type of diagnosis. So culture can influence our perceptions and define the worldview. There's a million examples of this right now, some good, some bad. When I was a Peace Corps volunteer, and when I first went to Peace Corps, my best friend took me aside at the airport, and she said, every expectation, everything that you think that you knew, everything that you read before you decided to make this journey, throw it out the window. On the plane, just let it all go and let whatever experiences that you have there enrich your worldview. And I really have always thanked Susan for that, because in my situation, it was great advice. I was young, and I felt prepared, but of course I wasn't to go live in another culture for several years. And I tried to be really open and learn from that experience. There's something here in the chat. Let's check it. There's a video that shows two young children, maybe 3 or 4 years old. One child is white, the other is not, but of a different color. The speakers ask, "What's the difference between you two?" The children say something like, "She likes strawberry and I like chocolate." This shows that prejudices are learned and not inherent in our souls. Yes, thank you for sharing that. There are so many videos about that, about kids just being kids. And they are learned to maybe view someone differently or negatively because of their background, or because of their color, or because of their gender. And I think one of the things about a situation like that is then you can move on to look at other videos about what do people think about with I think you guys have probably, a lot of you seen like the doll experiment, and how children look at dolls of different colors and different races and different ethnicities, and what they say what maybe they're experiencing from that. They say what maybe they think the world wants from that, and reading and looking at some of that psychology behind that can be helpful to us as humans and as practitioners. So culture develops over time, and is resistant to change. So that can mean several different things. Obviously, we know that no culture is just born immediately. Some of them grow quickly, though, depending upon the times that we're living in, or political climates and things of that nature. And culture, I think, can be resistant to change. I don't think that that's always true. But it's something that feels comfortable to us, that our culture that we were brought up, we feel often, not everyone, people will feel that like, this is comfortable for me to be in this situation with people of my own culture. And often it is hard to change from that. And many people do want to as well, not necessarily change their culture, but maybe change their viewpoint on different cultures. So there's a chat, the ways of life passed down from generation to generation. Yes, absolutely. History, traditions, all of that, spoken word and stories, and what ancestors have gone through are extremely enriching for people. Different cultures grew out of the rejection of the one true living God. I think that some people can have that viewpoint. In my experience, I think that we want to embrace that all people, all cultures are able to have whatever that word, God or something, means to them. So I think that different cultures, I probably personally would not use the word rejection. I think there's so many different viewpoints of spirituality, and I think that we should honor them all. There's a couple characteristics of culture that I'll just kind of go through. These are, most cultural groups will uphold most of the common characteristics, but not all of them. It can include like identity development, multiple identities in your self-concept, the rites of passage, rites and rituals that mark specific developmental milestones. And there's so many examples of that within culture, some that people agree with and some that people don't agree with. But we, coming from a different culture, looking at different cultures, someone put, because we're born with choice, that is True. Very true that people are able to look at that. There's a broad role of sex and sexuality. That is a topic that could be its own topic. Images and symbols and myths, again, going back to what someone talked about, passing down from generation to generation. When I lived in Liberia, West Africa, and I was there at the request of the Ministry to Health for the country to work on some trainings about diarrhea prevention and treatment, and also working on malaria prevention and treatment. And one of the things that was really interesting to me was learning so much about the images and the symbols and the myths. And then I was working as like a trainer of trainer. I was working with Liberian nurses, and they were actually doing the training on things in their community. And so how could we incorporate some of that into our training? So here, how can we incorporate some of those images and symbols into how we react and interact with our clients in our clinics? Religion and spirituality, that's been brought up multiple times already in the chat, which is everybody has their different views, and we want to honor and respect them. View and use and sources and the idea of power and authority. This is one I think is really interesting from a healthcare perspective. This is one of the reasons when we talk about ethics tomorrow, if any of you guys are going to be in that class, or gals, I mean, people, if anyone is going to be in that class to talk about that power and authority, that's one of the reasons that there are ethical guidelines for practitioners in the medical field, for people in the education field, is that people come from that idea, and we don't want them to abuse their power or their authority, whether that's perceived or real power or authority. People still tend to abuse that, and people look to that as well. Certain cultures, you don't make eye contact when you're speaking to a doctor, and that's not anything against that situation. That is just one of the social and cultural norms in that group. So we want to respect that as well. The role and use of language. We could have a whole entire training on the role and use of language as well. Some things that, you know, we can think about, and I may have brought it up in this presentation, is that we want to think about how can we interact with individuals and patients that do speak another language. Do we have access to an interpreter? Do we have access to language lines? Are we able to develop tools that, you know, like the little smiley face? I know some people love or hate that, but it can show a difference of where the pain scale is for someone. And I think that that's a really important way for us to communicate as well. Ceremonies and traditions, celebrations, that's the fun part of culture. And in my experience, and I think that as many chances as we get to like read or experience or be invited to those different things helps us really understand humans and where they're coming from. Learning modalities, acquisition of knowledge and skills, people might say education level for that. I think that maybe that would impact how we communicate with our patient. That obviously should never impact whether we treat a patient or not, things of that nature. And then, you know, culturally idiosyncratic behaviors. There's things that we do because of the way that we were brought up or what we learned or were taught or experienced that are just innate in us, and we may offend someone by not even knowing that we're doing it. And that is something I'll talk a little bit later down the road about some faux pas that I've made personally that I would never have wanted to do or make somebody feel uncomfortable. I didn't know I made a mistake. I accidentally did something. There's reward systems, the meaning of status symbols, role models, heroes, all of those words are thrown around in society. And I think sometimes they can distort our view of things. So that's something to be conscious about when we're looking. Migration patterns and geographics, we've talked a little bit about that already in our definition of culture. Geographic patterns are really important. If we're having patients, I often see in some of the acupuncture groups that there are patients that are very migratory, that they're going from one location to the other. And people are asking, hey, who's in such and such area of the world or the country that could treat this patient, because they want that patient to have continuing care. And I think that's a wonderful thing about our community as acupuncturists and herbalists, Chinese medicine practitioners, however we want to call ourselves, is that we do want to honor that continuity of treatment. I think that's wonderful. There's concepts of sanction and punishment. I sometimes do see that in the acupuncture world, where maybe someone doesn't agree with the way a patient behaved. Obviously, we do not have to take any kind of abuse that a patient is wielding at us, but sometimes we might want to step back and say, is there a reason or something that's causing this patient to behave the way they are today, and not take it personal? I know often when I first started practicing, I would over-examine on my way home from work interactions with patients. And, as time came and hopefully I grew in my maturity and my experiences, I realized, people that come to us that are in pain, they're in pain. And sometimes they just want to be out of pain. And so they're not wanting to have that type of experience where they're being judged for that behavior. So I just encourage everyone to keep that in mind. We're all coming from a different space. There's a lot of perspectives on gender roles and relationships. One of the student that's going to speak to you guys later today before lunch has a good presentation, I believe, on that. Someone put in the chat, I think your comments are illustrative of how a heart-held belief and statements from that place can be taken differently. Yes, I found myself tightening up with a declarative statement that may not match my own. Yes, I agree, Jocelyn. I think this is a really hard subject to teach, and I want to have a conversation about it. I'm definitely not trying to make a declarative statement that is going to offend or upset anyone. I wanted to try to approach this with some personal interactions, and just give my viewpoint. I know that we all have different viewpoints, and I want to honor all of them. And I think that I really want people to respond in the chat. And I think it's great if we have some disagreement and some chatter, as long as we're able to do it in, a respectful way to each other. And realize, I was looking at the group of participants. There are people from many countries and many different cities and parts of the world, and we don't know half. We don't know a small 1% of their background or where they're coming from. So let's again, let's just try to experience that. But I really appreciate everyone sharing those thoughts. I have had a experience in my past where I actually had to ask a patient to leave a treatment room because I personally, what they said was very difficult to listen to. They were saying some very racist viewpoints, and the one person was the patient that I was treating. The other person was the person that the partner of the patient that came in, and that was the person that was stating those things. And thank you. Yeah, it was very hard. I tried to be graceful, but I finally said to the person, I'm very sorry. You're not the patient that's being treated. I would like for you to step out to the room, to the patient room, the waiting room, because I don't want to tolerate those types of statements. And I really want to focus on giving this patient the best treatment. And fortunately for me, the patient that I was treating agreed with that and encouraged that person to move on. And those are huge ethical concerns. Like, where do we draw the line for something that is considered offensive, and how do we try to help our patients in the best way that we can, being open? And for me, as a white person, I really did not want to tolerate, and it, in my opinion, again, just my opinion, you can disagree, I did not want to accept what that person was going to stand there and spew some hatred. And so I really just wanted them to step out. The patient was able to be treated, and we went on from there. So we've probably talked about most of these, and we'll talk about some more in the past. Thank you, Tina, for your comments. History and past circumstances that have contributed to a certain group or any group's current economic, social, political status within a broader culture is really experienced individually. And as providers, we want to do our best to not be judgmental, as many people have brought up in the statement. But I also, in the chat, I also think that we don't want to encourage a really hateful behavior either. So let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. So elements of culture, these can be language, or not using language, using sign language, using hand language, using symbols, those types of things. Art, music, food, our discourse, our social discourse, entertainment, labor, work, those types of things. Someone put in here, hate the evil, not the person. Yes, that is an extremely compassionate and very mature way to look at things. Thank you for sharing that. So with elements of culture, there's an organization of production, and I think what I'm referring to here is organizing around something specific. Again, it could be music, it could be work, it could be labor. I used to work for an organization called the National Center for Farm Worker Health, and this was before it was actually right towards the end of acupuncture school. And this organization I mentioned earlier worked with migrant health workers. And yesterday, I live here in Texas right now, in Austin. I've lived many different places. We are experiencing an extreme heat wave here, and I know many parts of the world are. I saw that even in Iran, it hit 120 degrees 22 Fahrenheit. Here in Texas, Arizona is hitting 118 degrees Fahrenheit. It's very hard. Yes, someone's saying here in Round Rock, 102, 103, we're hitting 108, 109, West Texas hit 122, places in Florida, places that don't have air conditioning in different areas. So long way of saying that this organization of production around work, I just really thought, I said to some of my friends and posted in my social media, please think about the food that you're eating and where it's coming from and the people that are gathering that food for us to eat and buy at the grocery store. They are at extreme risk of heat related illness right now, and chronic exposure to heat like that, as we all know in Chinese medicine, leads to a lot of medical issues and really can deplete your kidneys in such a way that can be very dangerous for the workers. So that's one kind of example I wanted to give of that. So structure of the family and other social groups. You guys have mentioned a lot of great things in the chat regarding that. And I think that this is something very, very personal. I'm sorry, I tried to turn that Skype off and it keeps coming up. I hope you guys can't see it. Structure of the family and social groups is very personal. And I think that, as someone said very maturely and brightly, hate the evil, not the person, or understanding that there are different types of viewpoints and religions and structures of family. It becomes an interesting thing. I myself did not have children. I currently have a partner who has a young teenager, and he is 17, and they have made some decisions that they didn't want to finish school, and I was like, no, please, let's finish school, and I'm trying to help them do that. And it's so interesting to me the way the structure of my family has changed, and how I actually even have become part of different social groups now with having this teenager. And this person's a wonderful person and has really enriched my life, and I'm very happy for that. But we can't always foresee the way that the structure of our family or our social groups will change, and that relates to a diagnosis or an illness as well. We see that every day with our patients, and especially patients that may be isolated. They don't feel that people understand where they're coming from. They may not feel understood. And if we can be compassionate and empathetic to what their struggle is, that can go a long way to building trust. So the structure of institutions which express or govern our social relationships. I just spoke a little bit about child rearing, education, religious practices, health practices. Institutions are sometimes good and sometimes not so great. We can see that with different government structures. We can see that with different educational structures. Some people can thrive really well in a certain educational structure. Some people cannot. That was a huge thing that we saw during COVID, is that, many people were struggling with working from home and homeschooling with children, or working from home and being motivated to work, or working from home and dealing with your fear. I know in acupuncture groups, I saw so much division often, and different ways that people were approaching things. But I also saw people pull together and help each other and form groups. I know there was so much fear about people losing their businesses and their livelihood, but also fear of us not being able to do what we love, to be able to help people and help them with what they were struggling with during the pandemic as well. I know there's lots of strong feelings about that, so I don't want to get into that conversation and detract from our presentation, but I do think it's just something we want to think about. What are the structures of institutions? What are the structures that may lead to practices of otherism or racism and those types of things? Tools and communication, rituals. There are so many different rituals and cultural things that experience that we experience on every level, I think. And one thing I wanted to give a story here, I hope that's okay, about when I was working with with the Ministry of Health in the country of Liberia. There were many different ideas and practices around health and what it means to be healthy and how to approach health. Access to health was huge there, guys. They had been in a experience where they were in a war-torn culture for a very long time, sadly, and they didn't have access to healthcare. They didn't have access to anything in a preventative health way, except for what they had from their culture. What were the foods that they could access and eat to help keep themselves? What were their herbs that they used in Africa, the types of plants and different medicines that they used? And there was one very interesting ritual that I experienced in my village where I was living, is that they tied their crop health and what the crop was going to be, obviously to the climate, but they had a special ritual and ceremony that they did in the village to bring wealth to that crop so that people could have a healthier experience with their access to food. And I was very honored to be asked, to witness that and participate in that. So for me, that was a great way to see, like, what rituals are there that we can learn from different cultures. So let's do a time check here. It's about 11:06, and I think that's my time. So it's 9:06, you guys' time. Let's, Donna, is it okay if we went ahead and took the break and then we can come back in and get into the next section? Or
Yeah, go
Sam?
ahead.
Okay, great. Also, let's go ahead and take a break, you guys. Let's take a break for 10 or 15 minutes. So it's a 5 past now. Let's come back at.
Want to do a 15-minute, Kimmy?
Yeah, let's do a 15 minutes. So maybe 15 minutes from now, just kind of come back on. There's also a question, Donna or Sam, I'm not sure, how do we need to type in or update our name to receive credit? So I don't know who can answer that for that person. I don't want to give them the wrong information.
Oh, no worry. We take care of that, Kimmy. They don't need
Okay.
to type anything. We have their record.
Okay, great. So if you guys
Come
can all
back
hear that.
around like 9:25 Pacific time.
Wonderful. Thank you, guys.
All right, see you, Kimmy.